and welcome or welcome back to the McDonald Chronicles. If you don't know, my name is Gianna and I'm happy that you're here. Today we're going to talk all about the books that I read in the month of January. The first one being Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. I loved this book. So this is one of the books that I did listen to on audio. Essentially this book, if you don't know anything about it, it is a show now on Apple, but we're following Elizabeth, who is a scientist. I want to say it's in the 1960s, 60s and 70s. It starts off with her going to this TV show and basically yelling at the producer. She doesn't even realize it's a TV producer that she's yelling at, but she's going there to essentially scold him because his daughter is eating her daughter's school lunch. And essentially that turns into her having her own TV show called Supper at 6, because the reason she knew that her daughter Mad wasn't eating her lunch was because she's like proportioned it out perfectly with all the nutrients and everything she needs to grow. And so she was confused why Mad wasn't growing. And then she realized it's because she wasn't eating her lunch. You go back in time and kind of follow her through her journey at Hastings, the chemistry lab that she used to work, where she met Calvin. And so you're following their romance, what happened with Elizabeth and Calvin, why we're at the beginning of the book and she has Mad, but she doesn't have Calvin, and just that whole journey. This book was so good. The audio version, if you can listen to it, I would highly recommend. I feel like the person who read the audio version just did a really great job picking up all the different characters and their nuances and just made me feel really immersed in the story. So I really would recommend that. I'm definitely going to be watching the show on Apple because I'm interested to see what changes they make and how they keep it. But it's a really good book for following Elizabeth's character development. It's a really good book talking about real issues of what it's like to be a woman in STEM. And even though this takes place in the 1960s, I feel like a lot of it is applicable to today still. So really good book for that, following her point of view, especially when she talks about, there's this one point that she doesn't want to take Calvin's name, his last name, because she doesn't want her research to be tied to his name because she worked so hard for her research, basically. And just like something that I think unless you're in that position, you wouldn't really think about. So I thought it was a really good book. We're obviously following Elizabeth for most of it. We're also introduced to her neighbor, and then Mad, her daughter, and then her dog, whose name is 630. And you find out why that's his name. And I thought it was a really great book. Honestly, I laughed aloud a lot of times while I was listening to it on audio. And I don't know if it's just because of the way the audio narrator read the book, or if just the book in general, but it was funny, it was important, I really enjoyed it. All right, so the next book was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I have like mixed feelings about this book. I think that if I was into Shakespeare, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, but I'm not. So the parts in the book where there were Shakespearean quotes just kind of went over my head, to be honest with you, and I felt myself just like almost speed reading through that part and just to get to like where the end was, or honestly even skipping over it just because I wasn't really interested in that, nor do I understand it. So we're following Oliver's. The book opens and Oliver is getting out of prison for something that happened 10 years ago. And he's met by Detective Colburn, who was the detective on the case. So you end up finding out that Oliver was at this like prestigious Shakespearean theater school. And in his year, it was him and I think like 5 other kids. And something happens in their year that ends up with Oliver going to prison for 10 years. And Colburn, the detective, is following Oliver because he doesn't believe that the reason Oliver is in prison is actually what happened. And he doesn't even think Oliver is the one who did anything. But Oliver and his friends have basically been tight-lipped about it. So Colburn, it like bothers him. He's no longer a detective. Oliver's out of prison. So he's like, just tell me the story. So basically in this book, we're going back and forth between Oliver and his friends back then, 10 years ago, and what happened, why Oliver's in prison, and finding out what actually happened, or is what he's in prison for, what happened, and then bouncing forward to Oliver talking to Colburn about why those things happened, why they did it, and Colburn asking questions. I did like the book. I liked the idea of them going back and forth. I like that you kind of knew what happened throughout the book, but then I felt as though the way it was written, you were second guessing it, like, wait, well, did that actually happen? Did I miss something? So I liked that. I didn't feel like I knew what was going to happen throughout the entire book. There was a twist at the end that I didn't really see coming. So I enjoyed it. I did like reading it. I will say that I think that someone who's into Shakespeare though would have enjoyed it a lot more, because basically how it works is what I think the author is trying to portray is that these kids, this school is very intense. So they're just like so immersed in Shakespearean theater that it like comes out in their natural lives. So it's like a parallel. Shakespearean theater is obviously just, it's theater, it's drama. And then this is also happening. So it's like going side by side to like, how are the plays that they're doing related to the lives that they're living? And how are those like intersecting? And like, there's a line, but they're kind of crossing it. So that part I think was interesting. Again, I think if you're into Shakespeare, I think you would enjoy it a lot more. Just not really my thing. So I liked the book, and I ended up giving it 4 stars because I did enjoy it. Next one is Feel Good Productivity by Ali Abdaal. This actually counts as one of my nonfiction books for 2024, which is cool. I listened to this one on audio, and this one was cool because Ali actually read the audio. So if you don't know, Ali Abdaal is a YouTuber, a very popular YouTuber, and basically he focuses on like growing your YouTube business as well as productivity, different things. So I have been following him on YouTube for a while, and that's how I knew about this book. And then I got it on Spotify. So I liked it a lot, to be honest with you. I think this is a book that I will end up purchasing just because I felt like there were a lot of nuggets of information that I want to go back to. I don't think this is the type of book where you read once and you're like, cool, got it, move right along. I think there's a lot of things that can be applicable. And I did feel as though every time I was reading it, or listening to it rather, I felt like within every like 15, 20 minute session of me reading it, I had a piece of information that I could use and like apply, which I think that's really all you're looking for in a nonfiction book that is supposed to make you more productive. So basically the synopsis, or basically the premises of this one, is being productive without there being like such a grind and then burning yourself out. It's really just talking about how can some people, you know, stay at the same job for 20, 30 years and not get burnt out. And then other people are doing those same things for 1 year and then they can't continue. And how do you kind of fit that into your daily life? And how do you make productivity enjoyable? So how are you not just focused on like, my goal is X, I'm going to do whatever I can, not eat, sleep, or anything until I get to X. And then by the time you get there, you're just completely burnt out, to enjoying how you got to your end goal. So again, I did enjoy it. I was like reading some of the reviews on Goodreads, and a lot of people have some flack about the book as far as him using a lot of other people's research. So he does cite he cites a lot of other experiments, a lot of other research. And I think you have to know what his channel is about in order to understand why he's doing that. So if you've ever watched one of his YouTube videos, he basically reads other productivity books and he's like, hey, this is what I learned from this book. Hey, this is what I learned from this book. And so, or here's a system that I use because I learned it from these 10 books and I put them together, and like things like that. So I think if you go in expecting that, it's nothing new. I wouldn't say that anything in the book was groundbreaking, and I thought to myself, oh wow, like I've never heard that before. I think what's nice about it is that it takes a lot of different pieces of research and a lot of different books he's read, and then also his own personal experience, and puts it together in like a nice package. So you don't have to go out and read all these research studies and do that. And so I think he takes all of that and he makes it very actionable. And I think you also have to know that he was a doctor prior to having a YouTube business. So it's a research paper. I think a lot of knowing about the book is knowing the person who wrote it, especially for nonfiction. And not that I know him personally, but I'm aware that he is a doctor, and I'm aware that of like what his YouTube channel is about. So for me, I thought it was very helpful and I enjoyed the book. I think that for the people who didn't like it and who were upset about it or disappointed in it, they maybe thought they were going to get a book with brand new ideas, and that's not what this book is. So I would say if you're someone who is like struggling with just like the idea of like the grind and motivation and not wanting to do things, but wanting to reach your goals, and maybe feeling like you're just on a hamster wheel, I would recommend this for you. I think if you've ever watched any of his videos and you found value from that, I would recommend this book to you. I'm going to go ahead and give it, I think like 3.5, 4 stars. Like I said, for me, I had a nugget from every 15, 20 minute session of listening that I could apply. So I feel like that's useful. All right, then we have Divine Rivals. Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I loved this book. I thought it was so good. Reading it, I felt like Rebecca Ross was like, all right, what are all of Gianna's favorite things? Fantasy, romance, letters, going back and forth, history, perfect. Like, sold. It was awesome. I loved the letter writing back and forth. I loved the magical component of it. I loved how it kind of seemed like it was set in the past, kind of giving it like a history portion. I loved that it was kind of an enemies to lovers type of book. It was great. So basically in this book, we're following Iris, who has dropped out of school to work at this very famous gazette, like the most prestigious gazette in her town. And she's competing to be an actual journalist with a man named Roman. So basically Roman was essentially supposed to just have this job, and then Iris came along and essentially the editor was like, well, now you guys are going to compete for this job. So they're basically just fighting for different jobs and writing different articles and trying to get their articles published to see who's better and who gets to keep the journalist position. And then while that's all going on, Iris's brother has gone away to fight in a war. And so essentially this war is interesting because it's not just like a regular war against towns. It's basically a war between gods. There's a god named Enza and a god named, I want to say Dacre? I'm not really sure. And Enza is a female goddess who basically, you find out like hundreds of years ago, she trapped Dacre, I'm probably saying that wrong, in the ground. And so the people in the town were supposed to like keep these gods like safe and separate, and then something happened and they have awoken. And Enza is basically singing this song, getting people to fight for her. And it's interesting because half of the town, like there are people, it hasn't really come to Iris's town yet, this war, even though people have left. So no one really knows what's going on. So there's like some secrecy around that as well, about what's actually happening in this war and if anyone's even in danger or what that looks like. So something happens and Iris decides that she's going to go be a frontline journalist. She leaves her job at the Gazette and she goes to the front lines of the war. So then you're following Iris as she goes to the front lines of this war and what's actually happening. And then she has friends there and she's looking for her brother this entire time because he was supposed to be back by now. He hasn't written to her. And then meanwhile, she was writing these letters before she left and she thought they were going to her brother. So she was writing letters, putting them in her wardrobe, and the letters would disappear. She just assumed that somehow they were getting sent to her brother and he wasn't writing back. So come to find out, the letters are actually going to Roman, but Iris doesn't know that it's Roman, but Roman knows that it's Iris. And so you're kind of following that journey as how they're writing letters back and forth, but only Roman knows who he's writing to. So I was never bored while reading this book. I didn't feel like there were any lulls. I physically had to slow myself down while I was reading it because I didn't want to finish it too fast. I was reading at every spare moment. So highly recommend if you like fantasy, if you like romance, if you like people writing letters back and forth to each other, even if you like stories of war, I would recommend it. Definitely 5 stars. Next to our Hurricane Blonde and The Witch of Wild Things. I talked about these a lot more in my reading blog where I read random library books. So go check that out if you want a more in-depth kind of review of these ones. I'll leave a link to that down below. But basically, The Hurricane Blonde is a thriller where we're following Salma, whose sister was murdered in the 90s. And her sister was a famous Hollywood actress. Salma is now giving bus tours, kind of going over Hollywood deaths. And on her bus tour, she ends up finding another girl drowned in the same backyard that Tawny, her sister, had died. So we're following Salma throughout the book as she again goes back and forth between how she reacted to Tawny's death in the 90s and what she's doing now to figure out what happened to this girl in that pool and why all of these girls are dying at that house. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. In the beginning, I really liked it, and then it just kind of fell off for me. I thought it was quick moving in the beginning, and then after probably the first like 150 pages, I found someone to be really annoying. And she was so obsessive over the entire thing, and then in the end was just kind of like, okay, yeah, that's what happened. And I just didn't feel like that fit. So yeah, 3.5 stars. Again, if you want like kind of my real-time reactions to this one, definitely check out that reading blog down below. And then the last one would be Witch of Wild Things, which if you did watch that reading blog, you know that I'm obsessed with this book. I ended up giving it a 4.5 stars, but we're following Sage, again, like another witchy romance. And instead of letters, it's AIM messages. So we know the way to my heart in a book. Letters, romance, magic. Basically, we're following Sage as she comes home to her small town and ends up reconnecting with someone named Tennessee, who she used to AIM message when she was in high school and basically was in love with. But Tennessee doesn't know that Sage was the one he was AIM messaging. It was like a secret, but Sage knows that it was him. So something had happened and they get into it and he ended up breaking her heart, but he has no idea that he did that. And as an adult, he's interested in her and she's pushing him away because he broke her heart when they were 17. And then on top of that, you are following Sage as she's trying to figure out how to release her sister's ghost because Sky, her sister, has passed on and the ghost is still there. And so Sage is basically thinking, well, if her ghost is still here, then she is stuck and I have to do something to help her like be complete and move on. So we're kind of following that around. But again, if you want more information on this one, my real-time reactions, and a little bit more details, I would definitely go ahead and check out that reading blog down below. I'm gonna go ahead and update my reading journal. Actually, while we're together in this, I made a free printable. It'll be in the description box down below. If you want to go ahead and get a reading tracker like the one you'll see me using here in a minute with the books that I read. All right, so that is it. We have recapped the books that I read in January. We have gone ahead and updated my reading journal. If you want to see the books that I plan on reading in February, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss my February TBR video. Hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Cheers.